All right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. We are presented by SPI Logistics. If you're a freight agent not working for SPI Logistics, then what are you doing with your life? It's time to make that jump, make that move. Go check out my friends over at SPI3PL.com to learn more. And also, if you're in freight sales and you're looking to start out on your own, what better way to do it than with your own support model through SPI, which will be able to help you with that back office technology, access to more carriers, quality carriers, and all of that good stuff. So be sure to hit them up and make sure you tell them that Everything is Logistics podcast sent them to you. They support me and allows me to create, a lot of this content for y'all. And speaking of content, I am fresh off of the TMSA Elevate conference. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today because anytime you leave a conference, I feel like you have so many good ideas. But when you leave a marketing and sales conference, then you leave with even more ideas. And that's what I really wanted to break down today. So it's a little bit of I don't want to say a little bit of an off the cuff show today, because typically how I like to create a show is I like to write a copious amounts of notes, research, all that good stuff, load it up into a Google Doc. But today I am working with one little notepad. And if you can't see it, it is one little kind of Post-it size notepad that what I am dealing with. It's probably my favorite hack in the world is this little notepad called Aqua Notes. And you hang it up in your shower and it's waterproof. And so if you're anything like me, and you come up with a good idea and you don't immediately write it down, then you're going to forget it. So Aqua Notes helps me a ton. And that's where I am bringing my TMSA takeaways to you, is from this little notepad. Also some cell phone takeaways while I was at the conference. So let's get into it. So first things first is, there's probably about 6 takeaways that I want to jump into. But the first one being is that with the conference itself, with a typical conference, you have your normal sort of speaker events, lunches, all that good stuff. But with the TMSA event, they kind of took a new approach this year. And I say they as if I'm not part of the board, but I am an at-large board member. So there are other people within the board and within the organization of TMSA that put blood, sweat, and tears into creating this conference. And this year we had a new record amount of attendees. It was held in Savannah, Georgia. And it was a beautiful location. And because it was in Savannah, Georgia, we were able to bookend, kind of like almost like a conference sandwich of events that in addition to the conference itself. So to kind of to lay out the scene for you, the conference itself, it kind of starts on Sunday of this week. But a lot of people arrived on Saturday because one of the keynote speakers for the conference was an executive from the Savannah Bananas. And so what did we do? We all went to or not all of us, but most of us went to a Savannah Bananas game that Saturday night. So we were able to see some of the best marketing in any industry live and in person. And if you want to know, sort of, I guess the behind, a little bit of the behind the scenes, me and my fellow sort of conference buddy, and that's Whitney from over at KCH Transportation. We sat together during the game and we were making notes of all of the cool marketing aspects that we saw at the game. And to take a lesson from this team, minor league baseball is typically known as some of the most creative marketing moments in all of sports. They have some of the best promos, the best giveaways, the best food, the combos, like the strange foods that you can get, at ballparks all throughout the nation. And the Savannah Bananas have really taken that level of, I guess, expectations when it comes to sports, and they kicked it up a notch. And so there were so many moments from at the game. I'm just going to read through a few of them that they involve everyone. It is an entire sort of entertainment from start to finish during the game. Now, for a lot of baseball purists, they don't like going to, a Savannah Bananas game because it's not a quote unquote real game. But what the Bananas have done as a small market team is that, well, I don't even know if you can consider them a small market team anymore. Maybe a small market team is the correct way to put it, but they have big impact, and they to the point where they are inviting and garnering the attention of teams from all over the world. So this particular game, they had an Australian minor league baseball team come over that's kind of, I would assume, kind of trying to do the same thing as the Bananas, and that's to create a family fun, family friendly environment where everyone is involved. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. So a couple of examples: they had like the baby racing on the field. They had grandmas racing around the bases. They had moms. They had two moms of three racing around the bases carrying their children. Then they also have, a cheerleading dance squad called the Nanas, and they're all, some older women, grandma looking types that are dancing on the field. In addition to the players themselves that are dancing throughout, they're getting the crowd involved. I mean, it really was like they involved the crowd at every aspect of this game. And so that was really interesting to see it from that perspective, where you have so many different touch points, and they just made they took all of the points of friction in a typical minor league baseball game, and they made it smoother. So one of those examples is, with your ticket, you get all you can eat food. So all you can eat chicken sandwiches, burgers, hot dogs, popcorn, cookies, chips, soft drinks. Now, you did have to pay for your beer, of course. That's not going to be free, as it probably shouldn't be, because that's a huge cost. But all of that food being included in your ticket just made things so much easier, because you're able to get a grab bag, load it up with food, and then go sit at your seat. And then you don't have to worry about sitting in line or standing in line for more food. If you want to go back and get more food, you're more than welcome to. And they're just removing that friction point of missing the entertainment because you're waiting in line to go and, try to get some nachos, or to try to feed your family, and paying exorbitant prices for, food that isn't the most expensive. And let's be honest, everybody goes to the ballpark and they probably want a hot dog. Think of how much that hot dog costs them. Probably 30 cents it costs for the Bananas to actually purchase that and make it and serve it. But from the lens of the fan, the fact that that is included in their ticket makes things so much easier, so much less friction. So I thought that that was a really cool moment. A couple of other things: they had music going on the entire game, so there was at no point did you feel like, oh, this is kind of boring, like, oh, do I want to leave? And speaking of which, I did hear a while back, before I ever went to a Bananas game, that they had studied the attendance and they had studied the crowds during their games. And what they would do is they would take photos of the crowd, and they would see when folks started leaving the game. And when they would start leaving the game was around, the seventh inning. So they would leave after the seventh inning stretch typically, or even maybe a little bit before that, because they want to be, people want to beat traffic and they want to get home. And if there's extra innings, they don't want to have to worry about getting the kids, off of their sleep schedule and all of those things. So they made the game 2 hours, and then they studied the fans to see when they would be leaving the most. And then typically it was around the seventh inning. And it was because of all of those factors that I just mentioned. So by making these changes, they were able, and making the entertainment changes as well, they were able to keep butts in the seats for the entire game, for the entire 2 hours. So from 7 to 9, nobody was leaving, and everybody was in their seats watching the entire production. So I thought that that was a really cool nugget to sort of see in person, live in action, of how they keep your attention. And in today's day and age, when attention is very difficult to come by, you're competing with cell phones, you're competing with Netflix, you're competing with all of these different entertainment options, to be able to give folks and families, that set of expectations, and to fulfill it and go up, I would argue, to go above and beyond fulfilling those expectations, was really just, for a lack of a better phrase, a home run in my opinion. They involved the entire team throughout the entire process. So there were always, people were always, the ball players were walking through, going into the stands, walking around the stadium, throwing things into the stands, to keep that crowd engagement really, really active. And I think that music the entire game, I kind of already said that, building food into your ticket pricing, lots of giveaways. They also had fun signage throughout the entire stadium too. Like I was walking through, some of the bleacher areas, and there was one particular section that looked like it should be an alleyway that you should be able to walk through. And as soon as you look down and there's just a cement wall. So there's no way for you to walk through there, but they did have a little sign that said made you look. So I thought that was clever. That they had, bathroom signs on the bathroom for the men. It was a banana shaped, but the bow tie was around the neck. For the women's bathrooms, there was a bow tie, but it was the bow in the hair. So that was super cute. When you go into the bathrooms, they have the advertisements on, when you sit down, or especially for women, and when you sit down on the toilet and you close the door, and there's signage there, there's advertising there, which is the most underutilized part of, I think, any kind of event space, bathroom space. If there's nothing on those doors, you're missing out on primo advertising. So they had that taken care of course. They also had little like motivational messages on all of the different mirrors within the bathroom. So it was just that you could tell that they were really thoughtful, not only with their entire sort of presentation as far as the team is concerned, but the presentation of the stadium as well. And like I said, they had music going on, they had dancing, they had players on the field just interacting with everyone. So tons and tons of fun from that respect. And then to piggyback off of that, we actually also had the Savannah Bananas team come over and be the keynote speaker during the TMSA conference. And so a couple of those things that I think, it really sort of plays into a larger philosophy for the Bananas is from the some takeaways from the keynote itself, that mapping your people was a way that they are able to engage their employees to find out more about the employees before they ever actually start on the job. And what they found is that when they know an employee's favorite candy, favorite musical act, something that they, a goal that they have of theirs that they want to do within 5 years, a trip that they want to take, asking these questions prior to an employee's start date, they were able to build welcome baskets with their favorite candy and, maybe, an album or something from a favorite singer or something like that. They were able to build these little engagement packages so that when that employee started, they already felt like they were heavily invested into that place of employment because that place of employment was already invested in them. And they did so by just asking, simple questions like, what are your favorite things? And then they went out and bought those favorite things and made that employee feel special. So that has a twofold effect where the employee feels much more of an emotional investment into that place of employment, which prevents turnover. But then also on the flip side is that they also know that those employees, they're not going to probably stay with them forever. They're not going to work for the Savannah Bananas forever. But what they do count on is that when that employee does leave to go work somewhere else, that they're going to have the full support of the Bananas, but they also know that that employee is going to speak glowingly about them forever and for years and years to come. So that word of mouth, that referral based business, that, hey, you should probably go look at getting a job at the Bananas for XYZ reasons, really goes a long way. So that was another takeaway from the keynote itself, is how much the Bananas invest, not just from the team that you see on the field, but the team that is making those operations and making that game day experience much more impactful for the fans. Because then what are the fans going to do? Kind of the same thing as the employees. They're going to go home. They're going to tell their network. They're going to tell everyone how much fun they had. And that's going to create that ripple effect, that content snowball effect that I love to talk about so much on this show. Let me see about a couple of other takeaways. Oh, there was actually a video that they played during the takeaway, during the keynote. It was from a former employee. And he said, when I put my 2 weeks notice in, meaning the Bananas, asked this employee, how can we help? And it meant the world to that employee. And he's going to talk lovingly about his time there forever. So keep in mind that that employee was leaving to go somewhere else. And the Bananas executive team and the Bananas support team asked them when he made that announcement, how can we help? And that made this employee so grateful for his time there that he got emotional and he started tearing up. And so that was a really moving video that they played during the keynote. And they also talked about, sort of the shift of when they started changing their marketing, and it really happened around 2020. So they were forced to reevaluate, with a lot of businesses, they were forced to reevaluate everything that they do, and that's really when they revamped their entire sort of entertainment offering as far as the Bananas was concerned. So they're not comfortable with just staying in the same spot. They always want to take it to that next level, which is I think really applicable for a lot of different businesses, and really applicable for the survival mentality that a lot of businesses need to have today. Last one from the keynote, which I thought was really powerful, and it is the power of saying yes and it's in language that builds on positive and negative feedback. So if someone gives you some kind of negative feedback, using the phrase, not disagreeing with them immediately, but using the phrase yes and the reason we do that is XYZ. So using that yes and phrase to combat positive, or not to combat positive, but to combat negative feedback, negative opinions, things like that, agreeing with it and saying, and yes, and this is why we do XYZ. So that was, I thought, a really important takeaway. So I mentioned earlier about the bookend event sandwiches without mentioning the final event of the TMSA conference. So we started off with the baseball game. Then you have your conference. And then at the end of the conference, we got to tour the Savannah port, or the port of Savannah. And that was so incredible. For as someone who I live in a port city, I live in Jacksport. I'll be visiting to my Jacksonville, Jacksport people. I will be visiting that port very soon in order to, give the same love to Jacksport, my hometown, as I will be doing so here with the Port of Savannah, because it really was incredible to see this kind of operation up close and personal. The giant cranes, the giant ships. I mean, you see photos of these cargo ships. You see photos, and you probably drive by, the cargo cranes that are responsible for taking the containers off of the ship and loading them onto the port, or loading them onto the chassis, or trucks within the port infrastructure. You see those things, but you don't really grasp how large these things are until you're in person. And so we were able to do a port tour, and actually anyone can do a port tour of the Port of Savannah. You just have to schedule it in advance. There's a private tour. You don't get to actually walk around the port itself. It's strictly by bus. So you have a tour guide. He tells everything that goes on. He knows the ins and outs of everything, the top commodity that's shipped out of the Port of Savannah. It's typically cars, which is their biggest import. Their biggest export, I believe, is chicken. And that is I think they're the number one port in the United States as far as being the exporter of poultry products. So I thought that was you learn all of these different commodity factoids that when you take this port tour. So that was super interesting. Also, because of the history of Savannah, it's one of the nation's oldest cities, with a complicated past, to put it lightly. But it used to be where the port is now, used to be plantation land. And on that plantation land, they also have a cemetery, which was crazy to me that there's a cemetery right on the Port of Savannah land itself. So that highly recommend doing a port tour. I believe it costs about $40 to do it. So it was well worth it. And like I said, you get to see how massive these things are, and the organizational structure to think about, where you're going to put the containers to make your systems work so efficiently. I mean, that is, as a project manager, as a type A, planner type person, I am in awe of that kind of organizational structure of how you can organize all of those different moving pieces, literally and figuratively, to make sure that cargo goes from port to port, it was really incredible to see that firsthand. So that bookend of conference events, that bookend conference sandwich was really impactful, because you could have the marketing lessons from the Savannah bananas, and then you also have the firsthand educational experience of touring the ports really come together to really, I mean, it was the perfect sort of TMSA conference where you can see educational logistics type information, type experiences, in addition to, a Savannah Bananas game where you could see the marketing lessons like live and in person, and couple that in with, your normal conference attendance, speeches, lunches, that sort of thing. So that was really, really impactful. Highly, highly recommend going to a Savannah Bananas game, or at least watching some of their videos on YouTube. There's also, a couple books that they have for sale over on Amazon. I think Fans First is one of the books, but I think they have 3 books total. But go to Amazon, look those up, because it really was their philosophy. I think any industry can take lessons from and learn from and apply it to your industry as well. Let's move on to a couple more different takeaways. The next takeaway I have is a live show as main stage entertainment. I'm a little bit biased when I say that I really like this takeaway, because I actually co-hosted this along with Trey Griggs. He did a lot of the heavy lifting as far as the show planning, but we did an hour long show, live show, in the middle of the conference. Started at 11 a.m. We ended at 12, and then people immediately went to break for lunch. But it was one of the first moments that I think that at least that I've experienced, where a live morning show, a live podcast, is being taped on a main stage. Typically with conferences that I've gone to, they've had media stages that aren't part of the main stage. This was part of the main stage, where we were able to incorporate the crowd, questions, also feature, guests and sponsors, to have them come up on stage and talk about their different roles. So we had an incredible lineup of guests. It's live streamed, or it was live streamed, so you can go over to the TMSA LinkedIn page and you should be able to watch a replay of that. So that was a really great experience, just to be able to get, I mean, selfishly, to get back to my, it reminded me a lot of like doing live radio when we would, back in my sports radio days, we would do these live shows at different restaurants around town, and we would host them in coordination with the local fan groups. So think of like the Florida State Seminoles or the Florida Gators, Georgia Bulldogs. Those are all, schools that have a very heavy college presence here in North Florida. And so what we would do is we would coordinate with a player that was on the Jaguars, and a former alumni of one of those schools. And then we would coordinate it with the alumni group that's here locally in town. And we would have a live show at a restaurant, and it was always a ton of fun. So I didn't realize how much I kind of missed that environment until being able to be up on stage during that, that live show environment. So thank you to Jennifer Carpus Romaine. She is the executive director over at the TMSA, for asking me to do it. And then for Trey for letting me to kind of tag along and co-host with him on the show. It was super fun. So hopefully that's something that we can keep going at future events. So really, really loved that. I would highly recommend to any event organizers out there that is a really great way to get the crowd involved, kind of take a lesson from the Bananas playbook, where you can get the crowd involved, you can get your sponsors and your speakers involved, and then you can also get the internet involved, because it was live streamed. So it wasn't just the crowd that was watching, it was, the TMSA audience back at home. Maybe they weren't able to make it, so you can get kind of a little, a sneak peek of what the TMSA is all about. All right. Let me take a sip of water because my mouth is already dry. As you can tell, or maybe as maybe some of you folks have experienced, when you get back from a conference, you are kind of running on fumes, and that's what I'm doing today. But there's really so much great content that came out of this. I have notes and notes of things that I want to talk about. Can't fit it all into one show, so let's move on to the next takeaway, and that is, there are so many marketers who are finding success right now. And I know I talk about on this show in particular, the things that I hear and the things that I know that marketers are experiencing. And admittedly, it has been a little bit, not a lot, a little bit of doom and gloom, a little bit of struggle. We all know that when industry struggle, when the economy struggles, the first thing that gets cut is marketing. And that historically has always been the case, because it's easy to cut it. Especially in I would imagine for today's day and age where a lot of businesses don't know how to attribute success to marketing. So we tend to talk about a lot of the bad and how you can avoid the bad and how you can kind of, grow from the bad. But there were a lot of teams that are growing in transportation and logistics, especially in their marketing department. Whitney over at KCH Transportation is one of those. She has a team of 8 people now, which is awesome to see. And GLT Logistics is another marketing team that's growing. ITS Logistics is another marketing team that's growing. And I think the commonality between the three of them, among others, is that marketing is supported at an organizational, foundational level. So they know that marketing is not a silver bullet. They know that it's not just a case of like, let's put an advertisement out there and all of a sudden we're going to get, 100 leads. And that's how, we're going to survive as a company. We're not talking about companies that do that. We're talking about companies that genuinely believe that marketing is an important fundamental aspect to their company's success. And they put their money and their patience where their mouth is, if that makes sense. So they put their money where their mouth is, but then they also have the patience to see it through and to trust their leaders that they are making the right investment content decisions. And so those are paying off in a variety of different ways. So shout out to those 3 companies. I'm sure there are more, but those in particular are companies that I spoke with that talked about, how they're finding success and growing their marketing teams. And that commonality really starts at the organizational foundational level. You have to feel like you're supported as a marketer from the executive team to know that you can have a little bit of leeway when it comes to the time it's going to take to see true ROI from marketing investments. If you start a content marketing plan right now, you're probably not going to see anything for at least 6 months. You're probably not going to see any kind of success for at least 6 months because you have to build on what you're creating. And the only way you can build on what you're creating is by talking to customers, listening in on those sales conversations, and then taking those conversations and putting them into your content plan through your social, your email, your website, all of those different touch points. So then that way the messaging is consistent throughout the entire organization and then also at a digital level as well. So shout out to those 3 companies who are actually on the opposite side of things where they're seeing success and they're growing versus some of the other, maybe negative stories that we hear about teams getting laid off. So there, hopefully that's a little bit of hope for folks who are out there that if you're investing in your marketing team and the marketing team is doing their due diligence by sitting in on sales conversations, sitting in on operations meetings, finding out what the prospects are asking, what customers are asking, and then building content in addition to that, or because of those conversations, then you know that you have a winning formula that's going to pay off sooner rather than later. All right. Next sort of takeaway, conference location matters, and Savannah was perfect. Savannah, for folks who have never been to Savannah, it is a very small town in the southeast. It is about 2 hours north of Jacksonville and about 2 hours south of Charleston. So it's right there and, right on the water. And when I say that this was a perfect conference location for logistics, it really was because we were located at the Hyatt Regency, which is right on the Savannah River. And those big container ships come right through the river, which was incredible to see, to kind of have that big backdrop. And it is so funny to be able to witness folks in supply. I would imagine that any other conference that goes on in that location and they see a container ship going by, they probably look by and say, "Oh, that's cool." And then they go right back to what they're doing. At a supply chain conference? No, 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 no. Everybody's stopping what they're doing. They're going outside. They're taking photos. They're taking selfies with the ship in the background. So I thought that was really cool to see. Is that for a lot of marketing and sales folks, we don't get to see this stuff like up close and in person. So it couldn't have been, this was a fantastic choice for a conference. And so it was really, really cool to not only see that in person, but to experience it with other folks who are just as passionate about the industry as you are. So that was another little takeaway. Next one, TMSA feels so community driven. And I cannot stress this enough. One comment, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name right now. But she said that she had heard so many things about how TMSA is so community driven prior to coming to this conference. And then she came to the conference and all of those things were true. I know it makes me happy. I know it makes the rest of the board happy and everybody else who is a TMSA member. It makes all of us feel very happy because we pride ourselves on having those conversations with other folks, knowing that, a rising tide lifts all sails. And for you're not necessarily worried that you're going to share, trade secrets with your competition. It's not like that. It's everybody is sharing where they're finding success, where they're struggling, and offering help, offering insight into how they can help you get better or how you can help somebody else get better. Everybody knows that not everything is going to work for each and every person, each and every, company or initiative or goals, but you should be able to cherry pick some of those things and be able to apply it into your own business. And so a lot of that information sharing among marketing and sales professionals, it is so driven by the community that exists within TMSA. And so if you are, even thinking about becoming a member or even thinking about checking out the organization, just go to the website, follow them on social media, and then you'll be able to get that kind of a hint. And then you'll be able to, if the budget can, if you can budget it appropriately and attend in the future, maybe attend a virtual event first, and then you can go to, you can experience an in-person event. Next year we celebrate 100 years of TMSA, 100 years of marketing and sales in the transportation industry, which is incredible as far as an association is concerned. And it's going to be in New Orleans. So New Orleans, right on the water, fantastic city, great food, great entertainment. And it's going to kind of be a little bit of the same, I mentioned earlier, like a conference sandwich. We're going to kind of aim to do the same thing over in New Orleans. So be sure to follow TMSA to get more information, more announcements about that. I believe you can already buy your tickets to that. So become a member first, buy your tickets, do all the things, but just know that as a marketer or sales professional, if you are a one-person team or if you're a small team and you're feeling like you're a little lost, like you're a little alone, this is the community for you because you're going to be helped no matter if you're working at, a transportation company right now, or maybe you switch jobs to another transportation company, then, you always have a home within this community of, really, really experienced professionals. And then also from the just very like rookie level. So community is the biggest selling aspect that I think the TMSA has, is just being able to be that resource to other folks who really are just like you. They're trying to solve a lot of the same problems that you are. So I cannot recommend the community enough. Okay. Last couple ones. As far as like anecdotally, a lot of the conversations that happened, AI and podcasting were huge. And now I can say this sort of anecdotally because I talk a lot about AI. I have a podcast. And so a lot of other businesses were talking to me a lot about that. I hosted a roundtable talk during one of the lunches on ChatGPT and how you can start using it in your business. And I cannot tell you how happy it made me to suggest a few tools that will help these marketers and help these sales professionals and business owners be able to increase their productivity with a limited budget and limited time. Those tools are going to help them tremendously. I hope they do anyways. The only reason why I would mention them is hopefully that they help. So ChatGPT is a tool, obviously, that I'm going to mention because that's the topic of the actual show itself. They have a new app that you can download and you can use it on your mobile device. There's a lot of different enhancements coming to that platform, which is really going to, I already use that now more than I search for things in Google on my phone. So I'm already using the ChatGPT app significantly more. Another tool that I'll mention is ChatSpot is a large language model that sits on top of your CRM in HubSpot. That's another big one. It's fairly new. I'm a big fan of Dharmesh, which is HubSpot's CTO, and I believe he was a co-founder as well. I'm a big fan of his, and he actually coded ChatSpot himself on a whim. And so now he's kind of spun it up himself, which I love that an executive will still be able, they're not too good to get back in the weeds again and get back in the trenches and start executing on a new idea and just feel passionate about something and just run with it. So Dharmesh is the person that, coded this, and now he's got, a little bit of a budget, a little bit more of a team backing him that they've put around him, with the ChatSpot product, but it sits on top of your CRM data, and you can pull additional insights from your own CRM, from your own data, and you can use ChatSpot on top of your already paid for HubSpot plan. So that was another one. And the last one I'll mention is writer.com, which I think that most companies, if you are creating content, no matter what industry you're in, you should be checking them out. They're very affordable. You can upload your entire sort of content database. So think of it as like all of your blogs, all of your transcripts from every maybe podcast you've done, video you've recorded, PowerPoint you've created, anything like that, Google Docs, any kind of learning materials that you've created. You can load that into writer.com, and then you can start building out content that's in your own company voice, your own personal voice. You can choose tone, how you're going to use it, whether it's for blog material or for future content ideas that you want to create based on the content that you've already created. Writer.com, very affordable. I think it's about $20 a month per person. So it's very, very, I've tried it out so far, and it is one of those tools that I think is going to be a game changer for a lot of businesses out there. So if you haven't tried it out, tried that one too. So AI and podcasting were a huge thing. More companies are starting their own podcasts. More individuals are starting their own podcasts, which makes me extremely excited and happy to hear, because podcasting is the, if you're listening to this, you know that it's one of those things where you don't have to be constrained to, a 5 or 10, maybe even 15-minute long interview. You can talk for as long as the conversation deems appropriate. So whether you are hosting a show solo, you're interviewing subject matter experts, you're interviewing your customers, all of this can be used as a research mechanism to get to know your audience, to get to know your customers, and be able to create content that resonates with them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a podcast like this. It can just be a simple, I'll put some links in the show notes. I don't want to get started down a train of talking you guys how to start, a podcast, because I've covered it plenty in depth in the past. And I mean, that deserves its own like multiple deep dive shows. So, but it made me really, really happy to see that a lot of folks are using these communication tools to be able to have these sort of in-depth conversations that can really fuel the rest of your marketing ship. So those were a few takeaways from the event. One more thing that I did want to bring up is we also had a shippers panel at the event, which shippers panels, for folks who have maybe gone to like TIA in the past, or other conferences where they have shippers that get up on stage and they give insight into what works best for them as far as communication, marketing, sales strategies, what they're experiencing, what they wish they knew more of, from their relationships with their vendors, such as the brokers and the carriers. They really, that shines so much light onto what they're going through. And then that helps everyone else within the industry know how they want to be contacted and how they want to be approached and how they want to be sold to and marketed to, that it really can help you cut out a lot of extra time and a lot of extra BS, and just useless work that you may be creating that isn't going to resonate at all with a shipper in the future. And so being able to have them up on stage and to share their perspective really, really went a long way. And I'm going to share a few of those takeaways with you now, because I will say, also anecdotally, I've interviewed half a dozen shippers, and they've been on the podcast before. And I actually have an entire landing page dedicated to just the shipper point of view. Those shows are always my most successful, because we very rarely hear from shippers and we very rarely hear from their perspective. So I think it was really smart of the TMSA to have that additional panel so that these frontline, marketing and sales professionals can know what works and know what doesn't. So a few takeaways that I will share with you. And the first one is templated emails are a no-go. One, even in Gmail, one of the shippers commented that they can tell when you use a template to replace the name or the company because the font or the color changes in the email itself. So when you're crafting those cold emails and you're sending them out in mass and they're not personalized and they're not well researched, then it's one of those things that they can spot a mile away. They can spot those templated emails a mile away. You're going to get deleted or you're not going to get a response. So if you have the time and the capacity to do so, which you should, I mean, this is directly coming from the shipper's mouth, personalize the email, write it fresh, having a framework to work off is great, but just know that there are other detection methods of how these shippers on the other end can see if that email was actually personalized or not. And so if there's a font change, a color change within the email body itself, they know that you didn't personalize that message. They know that you didn't take that due diligence. And so they're not going to take that time to respond to you. They're just going to delete and move on 99% of the time. So templated emails are a no-go. Also, they said absolutely don't call me. Don't cold call me. That was said by every single shipper that was on. There was only 3. But every single shipper said, do not cold call me. And it was a resounding affirmative, don't cold call me. Very simple, straight to the point. So I know that there are a lot of folks out there who still believe in the power of a cold call. Sure. But at the end of the day, if your prospect and the person that you're going after is telling you that they don't want to be cold called, don't do it. Don't do it. Warm up the introduction. Connect with them on social media first. Don't DM them a sales pitch immediately after connecting with them. They also mentioned that they hate doing that. They hate getting those. So make sure you really put the time and the effort in to build on those, to start those relationships from an authentic way, and then to build on those, or from an organic perspective, which organic and authentic are just words that are infinitely overused, but they also are infinitely important, both on the shipper side and then, just from yourself, just knowing that if you're going to take the time to do the research and to write an email to someone, what if you meet that person in the future? And what if it wasn't you who wrote that email? I would just, I don't know. I would feel very strange to have a conversation with somebody that I sent an email to and I pretended to personalize it, and yet it didn't come from me. I didn't actually do the research. And so when that person actually met with me in person, then I have no idea what they're talking about. And think of how embarrassing that would look on you to not be able to remember that customer interaction, but that customer interaction was remembered on their end. So keep that in mind as well. Another takeaway, expertise matters. You would much rather have someone who has moved that kind of freight before, who's moved that kind of commodity or type of equipment before, moved that lane before. Expertise matters to these shippers. And so being able to start off the conversation with your experience, or their, I would say not your experience, but hint to your experience by hinting to their pain points. So don't immediately, that was another thing that they brought up, don't immediately start talking about everything that your company does and who you are and yada, yada. They don't care. They care about how can you solve their problems. So if you have that expertise, then you know what problems they're already experiencing. Speak to those, and then use your social media presence, use your website, use these other tools of communication as a way to solidify that experience. But talk about their problems first and show that you have some expertise in their company and in the freight that they're moving. All right. All right. Last 2 ones. Sales should have a relationship with their operations team to know that when the deal is landed, that everything sales discussed happens on the operational side of things too. So that was another really big one. Make sure that sales and ops are communicating regularly so that those expectations are met. As a salesperson, the last thing you want to happen, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but from the lens of you done all the hard work, you did all the sale, you landed the deal. Make sure the operations team is at least aware of those terms and conditions, and so that they can fulfill that end of the bargain. And so then that way your customer isn't lost, 2 months after you onboarded them, because of a communication of an internal communication error on your part. And trust me, if they do not say, if you have to clean up your own internal communications, then that is a red flag to these shippers to know that you don't even have a grasp of what's going on in your own building. How could you possibly have a grasp on what's going to go on with my freight? And so that's what these shippers are thinking. So make sure that you are or sales and operations and marketing are meeting regularly, so everybody is on the same page. One of the top sort of tips that I've heard is, from an internal marketing perspective, is that you want to make sure that everyone within the organization is on the same page first before you start marketing that message to external parties. So that's just I think a really good lesson for marketing and sales, is to make sure that everybody from marketing, sales, and operations are all on the same page. Final one, keeping communication consistent in the market, whether it's the first month you're working with them or the first few years. Quote, don't disappear after you won the business. And so what they were referring to is that during COVID, what these shippers were personally experiencing is that they had a lot of communication, regular communication of what's going on in the market, how it's affecting their freight, how it's affecting their pricing. And that was communicated regularly. But now with the market turned a little bit, it's not, sort of this gold rush anymore. Now it's a situation where everybody's fighting for their life, and communication from your current customers is dwindled. And so they're not hearing from their account reps, from their sales reps, from their ops teams on a regular basis like they were too. And they want that. They want that regular communication so they can sit, whether the market is tight or whether it's a bull or a bear market, they want that regular communication. So that was another little takeaway from the shippers panel. So that was about 6 or 7, I think, takeaways that I gave y'all, plus the Savannah Bananas takeaways, which I can't even count right now. It's probably closer to like 20 takeaways from TMSA. So hopefully you enjoyed, this little bit of a roundup of all of the big takeaways, at least from my perspective, that I experienced attending TMSA Elevate. Like I said, the community is just so powerful with this group that if you are at the slightest interest, I highly recommend, just at minimum, following the group on social media. LinkedIn is the platform where they are most active. So I would suggest following them there, connecting with other board members. We're all listed, under the employee section of the TMSA LinkedIn page. Connect with all of us there. Jennifer, who is the executive director, is constantly on, different podcasts and shows. And so she's always sharing the perspectives and the goals of the TMSA. So highly, highly recommend giving her a follow and really listening in on anytime she does an interview. I mean, she really is leading this nearly 100-year-old association into the modern age. And it's been incredible to watch from my first TMSA last year, where we had, a little over 100 people attend that conference, to this year where we had 236 people attend in person, which, obviously there are other events where thousands of people show up, but this event, you can really have those in-depth conversations and really get those key takeaways to help you better yourself, have that, own internal growth trajectory be increased, and then you can better your company, or maybe your next company, by learning the things that you learned from these people and from this event. So I cannot state it enough. That's where my brain is kind of at right now. You guys got me with all of the takeaways. I will have more content coming about this conference, especially from a social media perspective. I got a lot of great B-roll from the Bananas game and from the port tour. So I'll be sharing those in the coming weeks. Just be sure to check out my socials for more of that information. But that about does it. I am going to go make a sandwich, and I'm going to lay my behind on the couch and answer some emails, which is, I guess, sort of the things you got to do after you get back from a conference, is to catch up on email inbox hell. which is what I am currently experiencing at the moment. So hope you all enjoyed this conversation. To find more of my work, be sure to hit up everythingislogistics.com. And until next time, I will see you all real soon. And